Hi guys! So thanks for letting us make this movie for you. So we don't have to come to class, so you don't have to come to class. So we are going to go over our little case study article, and it was titled In-Home Treatment of Reactive Attachment Disorder in a Therapeutic Foster Care System, a Case Example. And it is on Sam, 17-year-old boy. All right, so I'm going to go over a little bit about what exactly reactive attachment disorder is. It is a chronic disruption of early childhood attachment, and it's often underdiagnosed because therapists don't recognize it. They will diagnose it as mental retardation or ADHD a lot of the times. Symptoms of RAD are pervasive, or they can be pervasive throughout an individual's life, so it's not just contained to childhood. The DSM has 3 different criteria for RAD. The first criteria is evidence of a clearly disturbed and developmentally inappropriate social relatedness in most contexts beginning before the age of 5. The second one is evidence of pathogenic care, and the third one is presumption that the pathogenic care is responsible for the disturbed behavior. And there are 2 types of RAD. The first is inhibited and the second is disinhibited, and unfortunately they didn't provide us with definitions of what those are. All right, so Bowlby has identified 4 different stages of attachment. The first one is just like from newborn to 8 weeks, and that's just when they need to be in close proximity with a caregiver in order for their needs to be met. The second stage of attachment is from 8 to 12 weeks, and they show a preference for caregiver through behavioral cues to get attention. So they're constantly acting in certain ways in order to get reactions and attention from their caregiver. The third stage is from 12 weeks to 2 years old, and that's when the true attachment process begins. Infants begin to anticipate caregiver actions and adjust behavior accordingly to get those reactions from their caregiver. And in this stage, caregiver consistency is also important because infants can learn to rely on other people. So basically, the fourth stage then is the understanding of caregiver independence and development of reciprocity. So infants begin to understand that they're separate from their caregiver and that their caregiver can reciprocate behaviors and actions towards them when the infant interacts with them. And the key aspect in all stages, in these 4 stages of attachment, is consistency. And if there isn't consistency, attachment becomes disrupted because infants learn that they cannot rely or depend on other people to take care of them. And so the formation of reactive attachment disorder is a chronic inconsistency in meeting needs coupled with early childhood trauma. All right, so I'm going to go over the symptoms of RAD right now. So it often goes undiagnosed because mental health professionals get confused about what exactly is going on. Like I said before, they're often diagnosed with mental retardation or ADHD. These children with RAD have low self-esteem and a lack of self-control, and they also exhibit antisocial attitudes and behaviors, and they are prone to aggression and violence. And then so the symptoms are on 6 different domains. So it's behavioral, cognitive functioning, affect modulation, social, physical sense of self, and spiritual and moral development. So these are just some more behavioral consequences of RAD. So they are self-destructive, often exhibit suicidal behavior, self-mutilative, self-defeating, pathological lying, over-aggressive or passive-aggressive. They are manipulative, they exhibit animal cruelty, and they often have physical and sexual abuse histories. All right, so early childhood is a really important time when it comes to RAD. So self-regulation and affect modulation are really important in order for children to develop appropriately. And children who are left to deal with their own emotional and physical needs have several things that they lack. They cannot self-soothe, and they also internalize caregivers as uncaring or a threat to their well-being. So they learn that if they're ignored by their caregivers, that they're not dependable, and that the infants have to take upon like basically survival on their own, that they can't rely on other people to help them survive. All right, so love and affection are two areas that are really affected by children with RAD. So a lot of the time, love and affection are given only on the child's terms, and often they're inappropriate displays of affection in front of others. So they constantly are trying to get reactions out of others, and they're most of the time not appropriate. They are often treated for depression because children with RAD appear sullen, sulky, and pouty. And their social relationships are marked by exploitation and victimization of others, and they basically set themselves up to be victimized. And through this, people don't want to get close to them, which is what they want. So RAD manifests itself in different ways. I'm going to go over the physical manifestations right now. So a lot of the time they have body distortion, so depersonalization. They are not really living in their body. They're kind of like in their own world a little bit. They have poor impulse control. They use poor physical hygiene to control the distance between themselves and others. They don't want to get close to other people, and they know that by not physically taking care of themselves, like showering and all that, people aren't going to want to get close to them. And oftentimes they are either overreactive to minor injuries and non-reactive to significant injuries. They don't know how to appropriately react to injuries that they endure. All right, so treatments for RAD, I'm going to go over those right now. One of them is proper diagnosis at an early age, and this kind of goes back to the underdiagnosis of RAD. It's important for therapists and healthcare professionals to properly diagnose it so they can start the treatment right away because it'll give them a better outcome. Placement in a secure, nurturing environment is important for them where they can hopefully learn to depend on other people and know that other people actually care. Instruction in empirically based parenting skills, so it's important for the parents to also get treatment concurrent with their child. There should also be an emphasis on family functioning, coping skills, and interactions between family members. And it's also important to work with a child's family natural environment where they're going to be spending the majority of their time. So therapeutic foster care was the program implemented in this particular case study on Sam. I'm just going to go over a little bit about what TFC is. So for children to be enrolled in TFC, they must have a history of being in foster care. And in TFC, they lived with trained caring parents. This takes them out of like the sterile hospital setting, and that's their main focus. They want to get kids into a natural environment rather than the hospital setting where everything's so rigid. And children and adolescents may remain in TFC for most of their childhood and adolescence because this is a chronic illness. And TFC has twice weekly services that focuses on impulsivity, hyperactivity, anger management, boundaries, and abuse-related issues. And it is often a last resort because it is very expensive. It's around $100,000 annually, so it's really important for earlier interventions to be implemented early so TFC doesn't eat up a whole bunch of money.
So as Erin mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about Sam, who's a 17-year-old boy. He's the youngest of 3 siblings, and he was diagnosed with RAD at the age of 17. However, there was reported behavior that he met the criteria before the age of 5, but wasn't diagnosed until just recently. He has been in therapeutic foster care since the age of 13. However, he's been in regular foster care since he was 3 due to the abuse and neglect from his biological parents. Once he was put into foster care, him and his brothers were eventually adopted by the Brown family, but the abuse continued, and it was actually greater and more damaging than the abuse suffered by the biological parents. So he was removed from the Brown home at the age of 13, and since then he has been placed into 4 different foster homes. Every time he's gone into a foster home, he's lost the placement because he keeps running away. He's been causing conflict in the family, stealing, and he's had a lot of difficulty bonding with other members of the family. So in looking at the treatment for Sam, the first thing was that the foster parents that participated in this program had to participate in 2-hour behavioral parenting training sessions every week, which is what Erin mentioned earlier, and they cover topics such as sexual deviance, hyperactivity, etc. And so what was happening is, since Sam was acting out a lot, school officials suggested that he enter an exceptional student education program. And this is again because he had a lot of behavioral problems affecting his academic performances. And these problems led to continuous disciplinary actions by the schools, such as suspension and Saturday schooling. But before they went that route, they decided to try educational consultants suggested that Sam get after school tutoring or get progress reports to see if that could help his behavior. But that wasn't really working. He wasn't showing a lot of remorse for his behavior and continued to violate the school policies. And so school officials then began to discuss a placement in an alternative school. Sam also had some issues with suicidal ideation, and therefore he was involuntarily committed to a unit for 72 hours for an observation period. He had detailed plans of the suicide but never attempted it, and he also seemed to enjoy the time alone that he had in the unit. However, since to try and decrease these continuous admissions, he was prescribed antidepressants. So what the therapist decided to do is take a cognitive behavioral approach to Sam's treatment, and this was because Sam's cognitive abilities were within normal limits of kids his age. And what they wanted him to do was recognize other people's body language. So for example, he had homework to take note of the reactions of individuals he engaged in conversations with. However, he was showing to have a lot of difficulty with the therapist, and this could be due to the fact that before this particular therapist, he had had 4 different mental health counselors over the past 4 years. So he had difficulty trusting his current therapist because of his past experiences with the other mental health counselors, as well as his attachment issues that stem from the earlier trauma he suffered from the abuse and neglect of both his biological and foster parents, as well as the loss of both of those parents and the attachment experiences he had with them. So this created a lot of disorganized and disoriented attachment patterns, and this was seen by the therapist through sabotaging foster homes and the strong connection that he still had to the Brown families. He continued to contact them and wanted to return to them when he turned 18, even though they had abused him for all those years. But after doing some work with the therapist, Sam gradually became more open to communication. And once that communication started to go, the therapist then decided to do a cognitive intervention in 3 phases. So the first phase was identification of the cognitive error, so basically focusing on Sam's self-blame of the abuse. And then the second phase was the assessment of cognitive distortions within the child's reasoning process, so working on why Sam is thinking the way that he is. And then finally, the third stage being to replace the cognition errors with accurate cognition, so basically taking his distorted visions and looking at them in a more practical way. And what they did is they decided to take a creative writing approach, and this was used to implement a gradual exposure and imaginal flooding because Sam had such a hard time talking directly about the trauma that he suffered. And what it showed is he wrote a bunch of stories, and they showed that he was continuing to be the victim in all these stories, and this was again his the distortion of his cognitive thoughts. So to change that into more of an accurate cognition, the therapist assigned him to write stories that had more positive interactions and ended with more self-caring soothing. And this treatment seemed to work because Sam's doing really well in his latest foster home because there's a lot of stability that reinforces appropriate behaviors. And since then, Sam has stopped running away and has begun to raise his grades.
Okay, I had the method section, and first I looked at how they did their literature review, which, funny enough, the article wasn't about that, but that's the only methods they described. So they reviewed 2,000 multidisciplinary articles related to attachment throughout the lifespan and found little empirical examination of reactive attachment disorder and even less information about reactive attachment disorder in teens. Looking more specifically into Sam's case, we wondered, where did Sam's information come from? Did they interview him, look at medical records, or foster care records? And it just wasn't clear from the article. Sam's case is an example of qualitative research. And so from here, we wanted to describe what qualitative research is. So you can see on your slide, there's a whole bunch of question marks. Those question marks describe how we felt about the methods of Sam's case, as well as our questions about this type of research in general, which we haven't learned yet. Qualitative research is a kind of research that includes data, but the data is different. It includes words and text, images, documents, sometimes videotape and artwork. The reports that you'll see are narrative and have contextual description, and you get to use direct quotations. They're subjective and often theoretical and exploratory rather than data heavy. A case study is a type of qualitative research, and it's used a lot in psychology. It includes the intense and detailed description and analysis of one or more cases, and it is very common in clinical and counseling psychology. A case is described by Christensen as a bounded system, like a person, group, organization, or activity, process, or event. To understand what they mean by a system, it helps me to think of family systems theory, which could be a family, a workplace, a group, and the relationships in those groups. And cases are usually studied in their environment, like we've seen in infant mental health and other interventions like that. Data used in case studies often includes in-depth interviews, documents, questionnaires, test results, archival records, and life history documents. There are 4 types of case study research designs. Intrinsic, which is only interested in one individual case, and I can only imagine that those cases would be more of historical or popular cultural interest, like maybe Adolf Hitler or Marilyn Monroe. I can't imagine another use. And instrumental is the second type of case study research design, which is intended to aid understanding of a concept that will be applied in other cases. And then collective or comparative cases is when multiple cases are compared. So an example of this from my paper that we turned in last week was 2 artists were compared from different family types, and then their artwork was compared, and you could see their psychopathology reflected in the way they created their artwork. And then a cross-case analysis is the 4th type, and this is a style of report that summarizes and compares more than one case. And we'll have to ask Jen more about that because I don't know. And so my question for the group is, what design is used in Sam's case? Is which of the 4? And since you're not here, I'll ask Israel.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, so where the information about Sam comes from is basically they're taking it from his records, they're taking it from tests. He also has interviews. So, I mean, they're really just looking at his life, and so this would be an intrinsic case study. Our second question was, what is Sam's relationship like with his biological sibling, and would that be a stronger attachment with a blood relative? There's really not any information to answer that question. I don't know. It was just kind of a thought. It would be interesting to know if he does have a stronger attachment, but yeah, really not enough information to ever answer that one. Does treatment make a difference for adolescents, or is early intervention the only hope? Well, we know that it definitely makes a difference if you can catch a RAD at an early stage. However, I don't think it's hopeless if you start treating later. But I really don't know. I'm just going to refer that one to Jody because she knows a heck of a lot more about this than I do. The 4th question was, why does CBT work best with RAD? Looking at it, because with RAD we are trying to modify and enhance behaviors, I would guess that that's why CBT is going to make a bigger difference. Hopefully you guys have some more information on that as well. And then, can elephants get RAD, or is our species the only species to be affected? I couldn't find any information saying any other species really get it, but when we read in the orchid hypothesis, that whole weird, crazy section that really didn't make sense about the monkeys, and there were the monkeys that didn't get along and they got kind of sent out by the age 3. They usually were complete outcasts. So I don't know, maybe that's a form of rad in other species. That's just going out on a limb though, so I couldn't tell you. The last question is, what is the meaning of life? And of course, that is 42. Did you want some of that? Was this on?
Oh, my bad, guys.